How much do you really know about Among Us and Henry Stickmin? At first glance, these games seem much too simplistic for there to be any real mystery surrounding them. However, this mindset limits ourselves from discovering the knowledge hidden deep below the iceberg. This is what's hiding in Innersloth's iconic game series. This is the complete Among Us, Henry Stickmin Iceberg, explained. Before we begin, I actually scrapped the star system for this iceberg, as I wrote this iceberg myself and know about everything I am talking about. Layer 1, the sky. Horse Mode. Among Us Horse Mode is a recurring April Fool's joke game mode that started in 2022 and may continue for every following year, since it returned in 2023 with a new twist on the hide-and-seek mode. It can be amusing at times, but I honestly wish they did different April Fool's jokes every year, like at Lex. Seasonal Cosmetics. No, this entry isn't referring to the various crewmate skins that can be equipped in-game. This entry is referring to the various minor decorations that litter the maps around various holidays. This entry is pretty self-explanatory and not that interesting. Among Us VR. Among Us VR is exactly what it sounds like. It's a VR port of Among Us. It was released in late 2022, but the game doesn't have the best reputation now, mostly because its player base is made up of kids who turn every game into a screaming contest. I wouldn't recommend getting a headset just to play this, but if you already have one, I'd recommend it. Just remember to only play private lobbies with your friends, unless you want to destroy your ears. Sus. Sus is a shortened form of the word suspicious. It was coined by the Among Us player base years ago when the game blew up, as shortened words are essential to communication during gameplay, as meetings are time limited. However, due to the massive popularity of Among Us, Sus has become incredibly ubiquitous in meme culture along with the related meme Amogus, and even if you've never played the game before, you must have heard of this word one way or another. It's also in our modern slang, with people calling each other sus whenever they feel any sort of suspicion. Amogus. Amogus are the crewmates you play as in the game. This isn't completely confirmed as of writing, but Innersloth, the developers of Among Us, released a few community posts recently implying that they were indeed called Amogus. Wait, what do you mean that's not the real meaning of Amogus? Alright, fine, I'll talk about that. Amogus was originally a wildly popular meme which originated in early 2021, beginning with this infamous image edit. This became very popular because people started seeing the iconic crewmate character everywhere, in trash cans, logos, astronauts, basically anything that resembled two legs and a large visor, due to a phenomenon known as pareidolia, where people recognize familiar patterns in places where they aren't intended to be, like faces for instance. So popular has the word become, it's become part of our modern slang like sus. However, this also makes it very hard for any discussion about the game itself to be taken seriously when Amogus pops into your mind the second you think about it. Henry Stickmin media references. The Henry Stickmin collection is perhaps the game with the single largest number of pop media references. These range from video game references like the tiny huge island painting from Super Mario 64 and the obscure grenade reference to game Worms. There are also movie and TV references like this Matrix reference for instance. There are honestly so many that I can't list them all, so I'd recommend playing through the game yourself and seeing how many you can find. The distraction dance. In fleeing the complex, there's a failure condition that requires picking the distraction option when you're trying to sneak past the guards. Henry will start doing an amusing dance, which somehow prompts the guards, who somehow can't recognize Henry when he's dancing, and later Ellie, to dance along. You will then fail as nothing productive has come of this dance. This dance had untapped meme potential, leading to it becoming a popular meme among the Henry Stickmin community, and there isn't really anything else I can say here. I mean, just look at that dance. Secret achievements. There are secret achievements in both Among Us and the Henry Stickmin collection, but the ones in Among Us are not that interesting, so I won't talk about them much. There are only 6 of these in Among Us, and they're not even that hard to unlock. For example, one of them is to win as imposter while not using the vents, and another is to get killed while scanning at the medbay. The hardest one on the list is probably this one, which requires you to kill 3 crewmates by yourself before a first meeting, which I assure you is simply not possible on public games. The Henry Stickmin collection, on the other hand, has more interesting hidden achievements by comparison, like this AEIOU achievement, which is gained by clicking the AEIOU text on this fail screen, or the F achievement, which requires you to literally pay your respects with F on this fail screen. Again, there are more hidden achievements, and I won't go over them all, so I'd recommend playing through the game and trying to find all the hidden achievements. Sudden popularity rise. This refers to the sudden meteoric rise of Among Us, which seemed to just come out of nowhere and rapidly exploded to become one of 2020's biggest internet phenomenons. The overall story of how it got here is pretty complex, but I'm going to give a simplified explanation. The rise of Among Us was the result of several factors at the time that combined together to form the perfect conditions for party games like Among Us and Fall Guys to prosper. The first factor was something that all of you may be familiar with. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, the sheer boredom and lack of social interaction that was brought on by the sometimes months-long global lockdowns at the time caused many people to turn to online interactions instead. The other factor was just that the game itself was very simple and easy to play. It only cost a few dollars at the time, it's now free, and was available on mobile devices, computers, and later game consoles. You could jump right into the action minutes after getting the game. The rules were incredibly simple and you could pick up and play a quick match, basically anywhere there was internet. These same conditions are also what caused Fall Guys to blow up a little while before Among Us did. It was similarly simple and easy to play, but its slightly harder accessibility and Among Us simply being more interesting caused it to fall flat, no pun intended, when Among Us hit the scene. The third factor is that at the time a lot of large streamers and YouTubers picked up the game as it slowly grew, seeing the opportunity that playing the game could provide them, which spread the game even further until literally everyone and their mother was playing it. Bios. Bios were introduced in the Henry Stickmin collection as a form of world building, adding names and descriptions for pretty much every minor character in the game series. Gameplay-wise, it doesn't really affect it that much, but I find it nice that the developers took the time to put this much detail into the game. They are interesting to read through after you've collected all of them, and some of them also add onto the game's lore. Layer 2, the surface. Border green. Border green is a variant of the green color that cannot be selected normally through the wardrobe. Its main purpose is to serve as a debug color, and all players that join a game actually start out with this color before their actual costume is rendered in, with their name set to 3 question marks. This effect is more noticeable on servers with lag. However, you cannot play as Border green normally, and even playing with it while hacking leads to various glitches, due to Border green having an invalid ID that is normally used to load in tasks and various effects. Border green is named after Fortabass, the lead developer of Among Us. Mini crewmates. A mini crewmate is a pet that resembles, well, a miniature crewmate. It's rather speculative over what these mini crewmates actually are, and most people seem to think that these peculiar pets are actually the crewmates' children. This certainly seems to be the case and is the most logical explanation for these pets' existence, but this has never been officially confirmed. One thing I find particularly sad is that when a crewmate gets killed, the mini crewmate visibly reacts to the event and later stays at the spot where its owner or parent died, as if they're waiting for them to come back. Although this happens with all the pets, so this could just be coincidental. Lex. This was Among Us' first April Fool's joke, which ran from the game's release to 2021. During this event, the skeleton map is completely reversed. It otherwise plays normally aside from a few glitches, but this event was removed in favor of the new horse mode. The map's name is also changed to Lex. Although this event does not run anymore, the data for it still exists in the files, and changing the device date can still activate this. Airship Nintendo Switch leak. The Nintendo Switch port of Among Us was announced in conjunction with the new Airship map in December of 2020. When the port was released, it was quickly discovered that through a glitch, you could actually access the map in single player 4 months before the official release. This glitch was quickly fixed days after its discovery, but that was enough time for the fanbase to take a good look at it. Submerged fan-made map. Submerged is one of the most popular fan-made maps for Among Us. This map takes place in some kind of underwater base, and it honestly feels almost like an official map. It has many unique tasks, and the concept itself would be amazing to see in the actual game. I would recommend trying this map for yourself. I think it's just neat. Attacking the Tower. Attacking the Tower is an announced fan-made Henry Stickmin game made by Strobe Interactive, a team of Henry Stickmin fans who have been working on this for quite a while. This game is supposed to be an unofficial addition to the canon, taking place between stealing the diamond and infiltrating the airship. The synopsis reads as follows. Set after the events of stealing the diamond, Henry returns home to find that his house has been destroyed and his Tunisian diamond stolen by the Tower Gang, a group of thieves second only to the Top Hat clan. Seeking revenge, Henry accepts a challenge from the Tower Gang's leader, the Towerhead, to take them down himself. Unfortunately, as of writing this in 2024, the game is still on hiatus. The initial trailer was released in late 2021, but by 2022, the toll the project had taken on the team was too much for them to reasonably continue. This is completely understandable though, and the project is not completely cancelled, so there may be a chance that it may still come out, however long that may take. If anyone from Strobe Interactive is watching this, I hope you're okay now and we'll all be waiting patiently for this amazing looking game to release someday. Why doesn't Henry speak? Anyone who has played even one Henry Stickmin game most likely noticed something peculiar about the game's protagonist. While the rest of the cast speaks regularly, we very rarely hear Henry himself speak. He can talk, he's not mute, but he mostly chooses not to talk for some reason. This has led to him being classified as a silent protagonist, which is a character that cannot or will not speak most of the time. It's unknown why he does this exactly in-game, but he was designed this way so that he was kind of a blank slate character, with no real character, encouraging us to figure out that character for ourselves. This is the same design philosophy that led to other gaming silent protagonists. Why did Ellie get locked in the wall? In fleeing the complex, after getting captured and put in the complex, you meet Ellie for the first time, who also has been taken here recently, but the reason for this is never stated. She just kind of shows up there and eventually joins you for the rest of the series. It's implied that she used to be a dangerous criminal just like Henry himself, and was equally as capable as him, which could explain the need to keep her in such a high security location, but the events leading up to this are still unknown, and it may stay that way for a while. Crossing the Pit. Crossing the Pit is considered to be the very first Henry Stickmin game, released all the way back in 2007, although I wouldn't really consider it a game more than a crude flash animation test. The game is about a stick figure, who would become Henry Stickmin, trying to cross a pit. The game cannot be won, as all 8 of the provided options result in failure. Unsurprisingly, it is non-canon to the Henry Stickmin collection, but a remastered version of it is featured in completing the mission. Henry Stickmin / Among Us references in the opposite game. Among Us and Henry Stickmin both feature references to each other, which is unsurprising given that they were made by the same developers. Among Us features several references like the teleporter and the diamond in the trash disposal, and Henry Stickmin has many different mini crewmates that can be found throughout the game, which when all collected give you a secret achievement. Hell, the new airship map is literally taken directly from the game. This entry also relates to a much later entry I'll get to later. Crewmate Anatomy. The crewmates in Among Us have very peculiar anatomy. From the outside, they are very simplistic in design, consisting only of a body with 2 short legs and a single large visor. They are also only 3 feet tall and have no arms, using floating hands instead, which may suggest telekinesis. Their skeletal structure is also lacking significantly, consisting of a single bone which looks like the bone in a leg of ham in a dead body. Nobody really knows what the crewmates look like inside of the suits, as they never take them off, and they might not be able to anyway, as some theorize that the suit is their actual skin and maybe an exoskeleton of some kind, which explains the lack of a skeleton. One popular theory regarding the true identity of these crewmates is that they are actually mutated people, or stickmen as a later entry suggests, who were specially designed this way for efficient space travel. When sending people on long space voyages, resource conservation is very important to ensure the maximum chances of success, and people with the same anatomy as the crewmates use less resources due to their smaller stature. This theory really makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about it, and it's one I personally believe. Fleeing the Complex takes place in Canada. The Wall, the maximum security prison that the Fleeing the Complex is mainly set in, is actually confirmed to be located in Canada, specifically in southwest Yukon Territory, which is close to the Pacific Ocean and close to Russia, which many of the staff call home. This does have a few holes, however. First, the Yukon doesn't actually have Pacific access, so unless this is some alternate universe where Canada controls at least this bit of land here, the Wall would actually have to be located either in Alaska or by the Arctic Ocean. Second, the morality of the Wall is very questionable, seeing as they are literally willing to shoot to kill any trespassers on site, and they also put anyone who tries to escape into deep freeze, which is definitely cruel and unusual punishment. Unless the Canadian government in this universe is in some kind of dystopian state, I'm pretty sure this would be considered incredibly unlawful, and you don't need to be a law student to realize that. However, the Wall could also just be some secret corrupt international organization that could have gotten permission to build their facility in the general area through bribery or other means. Layer 3. The Waves. Painting Get Animation. In Stealing the Diamond, you can collect various paintings as the game takes place within a museum. There's actually an unused animation for when you collect a painting, and it was apparently developed for a while before being scrapped, as there are several data values that can be applied to this animation. Not much more I can say about this, honestly. Space Mafia. Space Mafia was the original game given to Among Us during its development. The game is actually based on the card game Mafia, which has very similar gameplay to Among Us. In the game, you and several other players have to work together to figure out who is the killer in the group, which sounds very familiar. This resemblance in gameplay was what led to the beta name before Among Us was chosen. Polus is a reference to The Thing. The Thing is a 1982 horror film about a shape-shifting alien organism that gets into an Antarctic research facility and terrorizes the inhabitants by shape-shifting and mimicking them almost perfectly after killing them. The film emphasizes the paranoia and distrust that sets in among the crew as they realize that any one of them could be the alien. The film ends, spoiler warning, with almost the entire crew having killed themselves off, with 2 human survivors left to destroy the alien and the base. In fact, this film was the main inspiration for Among Us, aside from the game Mafia. Even Among Us's main theme sounds very similar to the music from the film. The map Polus is actually inspired by the base from the movie, as it looks very similar and is in the same environment. It's a neat little reference to what was already a cult classic, and I'm pretty sure the game may have introduced the film to a new modern audience, which is always nice to see. Polis Petrovich. Polis Petrovich is a guard working at the Wall in Fleeing the Complex, who is named in the Henry Stickmin collection. He won a sweepstakes sometime before the events of the game and got to name a planet after himself, according to his bio. This planet would become Polus, the exact same one featured in Among Us. This little piece of lore actually confirms a lot. For one, it says that Polus must have had to be discovered recently, otherwise someone else would have named it. Also, it confirms that Among Us must have taken place at least a while after the Henry Stickmin collection, when Polus was explored enough to establish a permanent base. It also confirms that the 2 universes are one and the same, which is something I will get to later. Off-screen graphics in Henry Stickmin. There are actually several hidden graphics in various scenes in the Henry Stickmin collection, which are mostly off-screen leftover graphics used to create the scene. The most interesting one is found in Fleeing the Complex, and occurs when you decide to enter a truck while escaping the Wall. In the final game, the animation only shows the back of the truck, But if you let the animation continue to run beyond what it's supposed to, the camera actually goes to the front of the truck, showing that the truck is actually being driven by one of the guards, which is the reason for the fail here. This usually cannot be seen due to it being off-screen and being interrupted by the next animation. At first I thought it was a bug, but this unused animation actually is still present in the Henry Stickmin collection. If it was a bug, they most likely would have fixed it, but this animation is still unseen, meaning it's probably intended to be hidden. Next, there are some unfinished graphics that can be found off-screen in several scenes throughout the game. Here are some examples: a flat version of the Among Us poster, an unused TV holder in this bio, beta chair graphics in the cockpit of the airship, and this crystal in the storage room. Other unused colors. There are actually 5 unused crewmate colors in Among Us. The first is Fortigreen, which we all know by now, but there are actually 4 more unused colors. The second is Olive, which exists in the files but may be added in a future update considering it's a finished color. The third color is Saturated Yellow. This color is actually a bug caused when trying to chat as a Fortigreen player or with other invalid colors. The fourth is Off-Color White, found in only one place, the crewmate in the toilet in Polis, which I will get to later. The last unused color is actually a mix of bright red, blue, and green, and was probably used as a debug color in the Among Us prototype and beta, but there is very little information on this color, so if any of you know anything about this color, please let me know. Terminator 2 reference. In Polis, if you eject someone, they'll be thrown into the lava pit. However, they'll give a short thumbs up as they sink into the lava. This is a reference to Terminator 2, where the Terminator gives a thumbs up as it sinks into lava. And speaking of thumbs up, why don't you give a thumbs up to this video? Even the crewmate likes it, even as he's burning alive. And while you're at it, a subscribe would help you to make more Iceberg videos like this one. No pressure. Layer 4. The Depths. The Henry Stickmin collection was made due to Flash shutting down. Adobe announced Flash's shutdown way back in 2017, which given the 3.5 years it took for it to actually shut down, was actually plenty of time to archive Flash media. However, I don't think the Henry Stickmin collection was made specifically for this purpose. Sure, it would be nice to be able to play the games archived after a shutdown, but the Henry Stickmin collection was made to be more of a remake of the original games, adding an entirely new game and vastly improving the older ones. So no, the Henry Stickmin collection was not made specifically due to Flash shutting down. Unused bios. There are 2 unused bios in the Henry Stickmin collection, which are for the characters Kev Portley and Ryan Goldman, respectively. I find it weird how these are the only 2 unused bios in the entire game, considering how many bios there are. You'd think there would be a good few, but nope, these are the only 2 that exist apparently. Unused task. The airship map actually has an unused task, which is Get Big Ol' Sword. This task is pretty simple, as it is just getting a sword. This task is pretty simple, as it is just getting a sword, but the task itself is unused for whatever reason. The location of the task is still in the map, but the task itself cannot be run. This is probably a bug of some kind, and hopefully it gets fixed soon. Unused graphics. This is referring to the unused graphics in Among Us, which are mostly placeholder versions of existing graphics. First, here are some unused graphics for the voting screen, as well as various unused graphics for Mira HQ, which is the only map to have placeholder graphics in the files. There are also very badly drawn placeholder Xbox buttons, and this inexplicable placeholder for the pet shop featuring Big Chungus, SpongeBob, and Ugly Sonic for whatever reason. There's also an unused hat, the drinking cap, as well as unused versions of the traffic cone and digging helmet. Unused roles. When Among Us announced they would have more roles besides crewmate and imposter, 2 roles were at least planned that never made it into the final game. The first is the sheriff role. It's still unknown what abilities would come with this role, but it's speculated that they could kill crewmates believed to be the imposter. The next is the Oracle role, a crewmate who can know for sure that one crewmate is not an imposter, therefore protecting them from ejection for the whole game. Also, as of writing, 3 new roles, Noisemaker, Tracker, and Phantom, have been released. Still none of the proposed roles, but it's still something nonetheless. Among Us musical. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is the Among Us musical, which was actually a 2-minute musical number made to be part of a parody of YouTube Rewind 2020, made by YouTuber Michelle Carr. The now deleted video is supposed to be a parody of Rewind 2020, with several musical numbers featuring the trends of 2020, including Among Us. This musical went viral and became one of the most popular memes about Among Us. I don't really have anything else to say about this, honestly. Divert Power Panel in Reactor. The Divert Power task in the scale has many different locations throughout the map to divert power to. Curiously, there's a panel for the task located in Reactor, but you can't actually perform the task in this location. I guess this task was intended to be performed here, but the developers just kind of forgot about it or something. Among Us Scratch Remake. Believe it or not, there's actually a fully functioning, unofficial, online multiplayer port of Among Us on the programming language Scratch, which is insanely impressive when you consider just how primitive Scratch is in programming terms. This masterpiece made by Tim McCool features full working multiplayer on the scale with up to 10 players, along with a quick chat system, tasks, imposters, and basically almost everything that makes Among Us. Granted, it's obviously simplified and feels more like some kind of free trial or light version of the actual game, but it's still really impressive how the creator managed to make this much with Scratch. Link to the game in the description. Is Mira HQ a skyscraper or floating? When playing Mira HQ, it seems to be some kind of base floating above the clouds. However, concept art for the map shows a massive skyscraper towering above the clouds. This has led many to believe that this map is simply the top floor of said skyscraper. This hasn't been officially confirmed to be the case as of yet, so this will remain speculation for the time being. Unused text commands. In the Henry Stickmin collection, there's actually some unused text that is called off-screen. The first one is Dilenia, and is called during the fake fail screen for the jetpack fail in ETP. Dilenia is actually a kind of font, so this text and the other two font texts could be commands of some kind to switch up the font. The other two are Candera 26 and 35 respectively, and these are called on stealing the diamond. Candera is also a kind of font, so these two could be commands to switch to Candera 26 and 35, whatever that means. I'm not a programming expert, so I'd love an explanation as to what these commands actually are. The Dyson Sphere. On Polis, if you look through the telescope, you can actually spot a Dyson Sphere, a megastructure used to extract energy from stars, around one of the stars. This implies that there's probably a very advanced civilization in their universe, either the Amogus themselves or some other kind of alien race. This is a pretty simple entry and I won't go too in-depth on it. Polis Snowmen. The snowmen which decorate the Polis base are pretty morbid if you think about it. I mean, there's a snow sculpture of a literal murder scene. The crewmates really gotta get their priorities straight. Anyway, only mention this because of how peculiar it is that the crewmates think that murder is a good thing to make a sculpture out of. They really don't take it that seriously. The holes in Polis. Instead of vents in Polis, the imposters use a series of tunnels to travel quickly throughout the map, forming various holes throughout the map. How these holes got here in the first place is a bit of a mystery and one that we don't have an answer to yet. This detail always stuck out like a sore thumb to me, because since the imposters are using these holes to so easily sneak around the map, you'd think the crewmates would do something about the problem. Even just something as simple as putting furniture on top of the holes until they could be fixed would really help. But then again, these crewmates must not value their lives very much if they're making snowmen of murder scenes. Radioactive Tree. The tree in Polis needs to be maintained regularly. One of the tasks requires you to adjust the sliders of the various resources the tree needs, like CO2, nutrients, water, and radiation? The fact that the tree needs radiation is quite strange in a way, and has led many to believe that the tree is radioactive. However, I don't think this is the case at all. I believe, personally, that the radiation is actually just referring to electromagnetic radiation, not nuclear radiation, which in other words is light, which is required for photosynthesis. Radiation is just the emission of energy, not necessarily referring to nuclear radiation. A fire is an example of both heat and light radiation. So this slider could actually just be the light control. Personally, I think people are just looking too far into this. The Among Us and Henry Stickmin universes are connected. This is confirmed. The two universes are one and the same, which is confirmed by the sheer amount of crossover content like the airship map, Polis Petrovich, and the items in the trash in the scale. I don't really have anything else to say about this, as I already talked about these aspects in other theories. Layer 5, the Abyss. Among Us prototype. Among Us officially began development in 2017, and there exist screenshots and footage of an incredibly basic Among Us prototype. The textures are incredibly basic, with the crewmates looking very unpolished compared to today's crewmates. The map is made almost entirely of basic placeholder graphics with only a few complete textures like the engine and reactor, and even these were in a very beta state. The few tasks that exist are very crude with very little animation, making them appear rather unnatural. This is a very interesting part of Among Us' development, but we unfortunately don't have much more than a few images and videos of testing. Mira HQ and Polis were DLCs. As a lot of the player base joined the game during late 2020, what a lot of them don't realize is that the first two new maps to be added, Mira HQ and Polis, were actually originally paid DLC. They used to be priced at $4 each, but the price was reduced to $2 in January 2020, and it was made free in June of that year. Among Us 2. Among Us 2 was a planned game that was cancelled in September of 2020 after developers made the decision to continue to support Among Us instead, saying that the planned content for the game would instead be added to Among Us. Very little is known about this concept, but we can infer from the aforementioned statement that some of the new content added after the announcement were probably concepts from the game. Endless Out of Bounds. One thing I always found strange in the game is that when you're playing as a ghost, you can just float outside the map for as long as you want. Normally games try to hide the out of bounds, but Among Us doesn't even try. You can keep going until even the background textures end and the clouds or stars stop rendering. I'm not sure whether this is intentional or the developers just forgot that you can go this far, but this is definitely one of the stranger features in the game. Among Us development was almost cancelled in 2020. Among Us development was actually planned to have been cancelled in late 2020, during which Among Us 2 might have been conceptualized, until the game absolutely blew up, which made the developers quickly repeal the decision. Online Among Us Beta. In the summer of 2018, an online Among Us Beta demo was actually released on editor.audio to promote the upcoming Steam release. It was a pretty simple demo, but was good enough for many who didn't want to buy it yet. The demo no longer exists, but it was good while it lasted. Crewmate in the toilet. An interesting hidden Easter egg in the Polis map is the crewmate in the toilet stall. This normally cannot be seen even with glitches or exploits. However, removing the door texture reveals that this crewmate really does exist. It's unknown why this was even here in the first place, as it has no function and just kind of exists. Its color is actually an exclusive color, off-white, which only exists here. This is rather obscure, but it's pretty neat in my opinion. Layer 6, the Void. Among Us is technically a 3D game. If you've watched my Bad Piggies Iceberg video, this entry is very similar. Just like Bad Piggies, Among Us is made in Unity, which is a 3D engine despite Among Us being 2D. Entering the game using Unity reveals that the various 2D components are actually just floating textures in a 3D space, just like in Bad Piggies. It's surprising how many 2D games are actually 3D, but this is a common technique used to create better 2D effects. Unfortunately, unlike Bad Piggies, there's no way to access the third dimension in-game, as Among Us is much less prone to glitches, unlike Bad Piggies. Crewmates are stickmen. This theory does make sense at face value, but there isn't really much to either prove or disprove this theory. It does seem very likely as the two games are in the same universe, but there's no real solid evidence for this. Personally, I think this theory is pretty likely, as the crewmates could be mutated stickmen made for space travel, but until we get some kind of official confirmation, this will likely remain speculation. Crewmates are remnants of the Top Hat clan. This theory relates to the previous theory that the crewmates are stickmen and goes a bit farther, suggesting that the crewmates are actually remnants of the Top Hat clan after the defeat in the Henry Stickmin collection. This theory also seems likely, considering Among Us must take place at least a few years after the Henry Stickmin collection. the crewmates also owned the Top Hat's airship, which could have just been passed down to the remnants of the clan. I personally don't believe this theory, however. This is because the Top Hats are, after all, terrorists, so how did they get access to facilities like the Skell or Mirror HQ? It simply does not make sense for them to somehow own all of these facilities after they were defeated by Henry. I still believe that the crewmates could be Stickmin, but they are definitely not part of the Top Hat clan. Right-Hand Man's real name. The titular Right-Hand Man from completing the mission is only known by that name. There's no official name for this character, and there aren't even any leads to form a theory on his name. This entry is really not that interesting, so I'm not going to talk about it any longer. Wait, I just got a weird letter in my mailbox. It says Right-Hand Man's real name. Just kidding, did you really think I was going to jump scare you again? The universe of Among Us is already doomed. This is a theory popularized by MatPat in one of his Among Us videos, where he theorizes that the crewmates are, in fact, so incompetent in dealing with imposters that the imposters have already won. Basically, he states that the crewmates spot the imposter organism everywhere they went without dealing with them properly, like their home planet on Mirror HQ and the airship. As the imposters are now free to infect as many crewmates as they want, the theory suggests that the imposters went on to cause an apocalypse in the game's canon, therefore dooming everyone who lives there. MatPat uses the aforementioned film The Thing as a comparison to Among Us, pointing out that in The Thing, the main characters realize that the shapeshifter could doom humanity if it escapes Antarctica, prompting them to do everything in their power to prevent that, even if it meant destroying their base and sacrificing their own lives. Meanwhile, the crewmates' incompetence in dealing with imposters is so severe that it's almost like they don't want to live at all. For example, a game can end if all tasks are completed, even if imposters are still present. We already know that crewmates really don't care about their lives, so it makes sense that they would be lazy and just stop weeding out the imposters once their tasks are done. MatPat believes this ending is the canon ending, which results in the imposters moving from the Skell to the other maps and slowly dooming the race of Among Us. Personally, I'm pretty neutral on this theory. It could happen, but I equally expect it to not happen. Deity, Among Us predecessor. Before Among Us, there was Deity. Deity is a game made by Innersloth that was the precursor to Among Us in a few ways. The game was a top-down 2D shooter battle royale type game where players were affected by various deities while playing, either favoring or angering them, which would lead to various effects. The idea was unique enough for the developers to work on it a good bit, and they pitched the game to Steam's Greenlight service in 2016. Surprisingly, it got approved, but testers of the game gave mostly negative reviews, and the game never got an official launch, meaning it's lost media now. It went on hiatus in late 2016, and the developers came back to it in 2017, but quickly abandoned it to work on Among Us, deciding the game was just not interesting enough to continue working on. That's all we know about this piece of lost media as of now. There is no imposter. There's a popular theory going around that imposters are actually not real and that the in-game imposters are actually just paranoid crewmates who may not be mentally stable and are going around murdering crewmates for no reason. This does seem like a reasonable explanation, as long-term space travel and other similar situations can be detrimental to the mental health of those who aren't prepared in a way we still don't fully understand yet. This theory suggests that maybe the Among Us picked some crewmates for missions that may have not been mentally stable, causing them to go insane during their missions, leading to them turning on their own crewmates. A lot of people don't believe this theory, however, because of the addition of new features that confirm the imposter's alien, like the shapeshifter. So that was the whole Among Us / Henry Stickmin Iceberg. This has been my third Iceberg video, and it's been very interesting for me to find out all that I can about these two iconic games. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So anyway, bye for now, and I will soon be back with more epic video essays like this one.